Much love. My name is Mowa Oludumare, and today we're going to speak on a subject that really hits home with me, which is a suggestion from a viewer. We're going to speak on collapsing mental health and artistry, the connection between the two. And typically, when we're speaking of collapsing mental health in a broad sense, we're going to be speaking about depression. That is what I have my most experience with. I've dealt with it myself, and hopefully parts of my own personal story will help you along with yours as well, as we try to find some healing in the midst of life. You feel me? So that's how we're gonna get it going. So let's get started. Say first with my own story. My own story is that I've battled with depression for about 12 years, between like 11 and about 24, 25, or something like that. Mine came from when my father passed when I was, when I was 11 years old, and I took it very hard. I took it very hard, but at the same time, I really kept it inward to myself. And I if you would have known me around that time, you never would have even guessed that I was dealing with depression, because I was one of the most happiest kids that you'll ever see. Always joking, always smiling, always laughing and things like that. From the outside looking in, you would assume that I was the happiest kid that you ever met. But depression is one of those monsters that deals with you when you're alone, or when you feel that you're alone. Because that could be in a place full of people as well. And I carried that with me, man. I carried that with me for a long time. I carried it with me when I was in church as a kid growing up. I remember at one point when my pastor was saying how the Lord loves us all and things like that, I was silently saying to myself, not me though. Because the reason I felt that way was because how could I believe that God loved me if He allowed my father to die? I just didn't understand the two things. I couldn't see how those two things could coincide. So I just naturally assumed that God didn't love me, and growing up in a church household or a spiritual household, to have that as a floating thought, some of you might be able to understand how big of an impact that would have on a person whose life is basically revolving around the church. So I dealt with that for a long time. The way that I got through it, confronted it. Well, I wouldn't even say went through it at the time. I think this more so started off as a way of evading it. The way that I started evading depression was burying myself in knowledge. I've always had a natural mind for philosophy and things like that. So I began burying myself in knowledge just to understand why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. To try to make sense of it all. Excuse me. To try to make sense of it all, and to understand what's really going on. So that was my tactic. And after I buried myself in knowledge, I buried myself in artistry. A writer. I'm a writer. Started off as a young kid writing short stories, and that converted into poems, and then poems ended up being back to as an MC, writing bars and things like that. And then kind of going back to poetry. Now I'm going back to short stories and things like that. But it's always been around writing, and writing has always been my release. And I've always been thankful to Oludumare for giving me that skill of writing, because without that release, I don't know if I would have been here today. But that was my way of releasing pressure that was within me. That was my way of therapy. My way of not carrying the burden so much. And again, like I said, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the avenues that I had to be able to release those feelings, and I was able to make some beautiful art from it, which kind of ties in, or which does tie in with the subject of today, of collapsing mental health and artistry. depression is a trip. You know, it's a trip, especially for the artist. I say that because um, depression can both be your muse, and for the artist's mind, if that's the bag that we continually to go into, it almost is like a bad relationship, you know, that you don't want to leave. At least that's how it was for me, because I had so much depression here. You know, I had so much to pull from, and I was able to make so much music and write so many poems and deliver so much energy off of that I almost didn't even want to let it go. You know, because matter of fact, the time that I did let it go, the time that I was able to heal and move forward for like a good, I don't know, a few months or so, I was like, I don't know what to write anymore, because I didn't have my bag. I didn't have my bag full of depression. I didn't have my bag full of rocks and things that was holding me down. I just didn't have anything. That's what I was used to drawing from. So when I didn't have the thing that I was used to drawing from, I was lost for a moment. I was like, dang, man, what am I going to write about now? You know? So that was a trip, and that's how depression gets a lot of us. A lot of us. It's like depression becomes a friend. The depression becomes that ear that always listens. Depression becomes those arms that's always willing to hug us. Depression becomes, you know, that comforting pillow to lay down on. But at the same time, it's destroying us. You know. So that's the dilemma with depression and artistry, is that we can make beautiful art from it, but at what cost? You know. Yeah. But there is hope, thankfully. And you know, keep in mind, this is my own particular story, and you know, I guess results might not be typical, but hopefully, just by from hearing, you know, what I did, will help you. You know, confront yours, and hopefully help you find some healing. So what I did was through my meditative states and things like that, I wanted to really delve and really understand for sure what depression actually was. And what I've come to realize is that, now keep in mind that I'm speaking of reactive depression. I'm not speaking of chemical depression or, you know, things like that where there's actual imbalances of, mental imbalances and things like that. That needs the proper attention, you know, things like that. I mean, even this does too if this doesn't work for you. But I'm most definitely speaking about reactive depression, which is basically the reaction, the depression being the reaction of a traumatic event that happened to you. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, and also understand that therapy is a beautiful thing. I know plenty of brothers and sisters who go to therapy and can attest to its wonderful outcomes, and that is definitely a respected path with the Mowa Temple and everything like that. So therefore, if that's the avenue for you, please take that avenue. Alright? And I'm going to leave some numbers and stuff at the very end of this suicide hotline. I've spoken to them a few years ago. Sometimes it's just good to have a listening ear. And I'll find some other resources for you at the end of this video. So you can have those as well if you need to talk to somebody. Alright? But again, what I did was, what I realized really was, is that depression was the constant replaying of a traumatic event in my mind over and over and over again. You know, I was playing it over and over in my mind, and not realizing how that had an effect on my overall mood. I didn't understand how it had a effect on my overall my bodily health. You know, because I can't remember the study, but they had like Olympic athletes or elite athletes do their particular sport in their mind, right? They just did it in their mind, and what they found was astonishing. What they found was that their body still reacted um, in the same way as if they was physically doing the activity. So imagine that with depression. Imagine that with depression when you're running that traumatic event over and over and over again in your mind. Imagine the effect that it has on the body, the stress, the fear, the hurt, the confusion, playing that over and over and over and over and over again in your mind. That's what depression is. I believe that is the basis of what causes reactive depression to become clinical depression and things like that, because it runs so much over and over and over again that it actually causes the imbalances in your brain for it to go up to that next level of depression. This is just my opinion, but I believe that's what is the basis of all depression. The constant replaying of traumatic events over and over and over again in our minds, and I mean it's understandable. It's a traumatic event, and trauma tends to stick around in your mind. But to confront it, here's the solution, or here's my solution. Once you realize that the traumatic event that happened to you doesn't define you, that's when you begin to realize your freedom. Because to play it over and over and over again in your mind, it gets to the point where you're actually defined by that. You're defined by a loss of a parent. You're defined by sexual assault, rape. You're defined by physical abuse. You're defined by all these things. Or you feel that you're defined by all these things because it constantly plays over and over and over into your mind, and it seeps into your relationships. It seeps into your business dealings. It seeps into your writings. It seeps into everything, into every fabric of your life. But the truth is, the things that happen to you doesn't have to define you. And if you go back to the video before, where we were speaking on what it means to have a knowledge of yourself, right? Or what it means to have a knowledge of yourself, you'll understand that the body and the self are two separate things. And trust me, I'm not trying to downplay the trauma that you've been through, And my brand of trauma is totally different from yours. And again, this is only one avenue. This is how I confronted it. But I was able to separate the traumatic event with who I actually am. Because at first it was like this. There was no separation between the two. Myself, depression, myself. It was like this. So everything that I did had depressed energy attached to it in some way, form, or fashion. Excuse me again. But once I learned how to separate them, and the self was able to look at depression, and myself was able to say, you don't define me. What happened to me isn't me. What you were, traumatic experience, was simply that, an experience. And the thing about life, I've come to learn, is this. Life is full of experiences. Good experiences, bad experiences, traumatic experiences, jubilant experiences, and so on and so forth. But the point of life is to experience experiences and then experience the next experience. But we can't experience the next experience because we're still experiencing the experience that we once experienced.